biker scene in Canada in the 1970s, one club in particular would stand out. Now, you might assume I'm talking about the Hells Angels, but I'm not. I'm talking about the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, which at the time was the second largest biker club, not in Canada, but in the world.
Charming, ruggedly handsome, and radiating masculine energy, Guindon was the type of guy everybody wanted to be around. He wasn't the tallest, standing at around 5 feet 9 inches. But Guindon radiated a unique aura of self-confidence that infected those around him. He was always authentic and unapologetically spoke his mind. Traits that helped solidify his name in history as the godfather of the legendary Satan's Choice Outlaw Biker Club. Continue watching as we document the life of arguably one of the greatest outlaw bikers in Canadian history, as well as the progression of outlaw biker clubs simply being about freedom and self-expression, into criminal organizations involved in drugs and crime we know about today. Let's get into it. Despite his current high status and reputation, life wasn't always pretty for Guindon. In fact, he experienced a tough childhood since his birth in November 1942. He was born to a poor French-Canadian family consisting of his father, Lucien, mother Lucy, and an older brother, Jack. Lucien was anything but nice. He was a Quebec bootlegger and a criminal that made most of his living off illegal items in the streets. He later moved his family to Oshawa in northern Ontario because it was more profitable for his line of work. Despite his smallish frame, Lucien was surprisingly good with fights. Unfortunately, he was also one to take the violence back home. He would mercilessly beat up his family, often forcing Guindon and his brother to spend countless nights in empty abandoned cars at the local scrapyards. According to Guindon, Lucien was complicated. He would repeatedly insist that his sons respect and obey their mother, the same woman he often beat in front of them. When he was in a good mood, he would offer 25 cents to his sons. However, there was a catch. Guindon and Jack had to fight, and the winner would pocket the money. Lucien loved to watch his sons viciously exchange fists and would even invite paying guests to the matches. Unfortunately for Jack, his younger brother always won. It's true that Jack suffered a noticeable disadvantage because of a shorter leg due to an accident that never healed correctly. However, one couldn't help but appreciate Guindon's natural feel for fighting. Even at a young, untrained age, he showed a fighter's spirit, good balance, footwork, and a deadly left hook. Eventually, Lucien's creation came back to bite him. One evening, as he was mercilessly beating the mother of his children, 15-year-old Guindon had enough and decided to spar with his abusive father. He brutally beat his father so badly that Lucien abandoned his family shortly afterwards. Lucy eventually fell in love again and found a boyfriend who owned a motorcycle and was generous enough to allow his stepson to ride it. To date, Guindon recalls his first time on a motorcycle as unbelievable. It was the closest thing to riding a dragon, a feeling like none other. He felt free, wild, and unstoppable. Little did he know that that experience was the beginning of a lifelong love of motorcycles. Eventually, in 1959, he finally had enough money to get his own motorcycle that he proudly named the Wild Thing. It's also in the same year that he joined the Oshawa-based Golden Hawk Riders. It was during his time in the Golden Hawks that his nickname, Bernie the Frog, stuck for good. A lot of it had to do with his French-Canadian descent. Nonetheless, he didn't mind it at all because his fellow bikers loved him, and the local woman adored his looks that contradicted his youthful, rebellious nature. His first wife, Nikki Blaze, fell for his charm after she spotted him working at the gas station. She quickly approached him, and the two hit it off immediately thanks to their mutual French-Canadian origin. They married shortly after in 1961, and would go on to have long on and off relationships through the decades. With such charm and reputation, you are bound to come across people who want to bring you down. Harold Johnny Sombrero was among Guindon's earliest rivals. Sombrero was a prideful, high-ranking member of the Toronto-based Black Diamond Riders, and insisted that everybody addressed him as the Supreme Commander. As you might have guessed, Guindon wouldn't have any of that. At the time, the Black Diamond Riders were a big deal. They had the numbers and didn't hold back when it came to bullying other clubs into submission. In 1962, after frequent attacks, they successfully brought down Don Norris's Satan's Choice chapter, and Guindon's Golden Hawks were next. In the summer of 1962, during an Outlaw Bikers field day, the Black Diamond Riders raided and beat the Golden Hawks in what would later be dubbed the Battle of Pebblestone. Guindon and his brothers were mercilessly beaten and their motorcycles trashed. The blow seriously damaged the Golden Hawks' prestige, and they were now taunted as the Chicken Hawks. Guindon couldn't take the humiliation and left the club. However, he wasn't done with Sombrero and his riders. He swore to take revenge on the crew for breaking the bikers' code. You see, field days were meant to be special, violence-free occasions where bikers would meet to show off their motorcycles. To act otherwise would be opportunistic and cowardice. Thanks to his intellect, Guindon came up with a plan to take down the Black Diamond Riders. To him, numbers were everything, and he knew that if he could outnumber his rivals, they wouldn't stand a chance. It wasn't enough to beat Sombrero and his men. He wanted to humiliate them for good. With that in mind, at only around 22 years old, Guindon founded and became the first president of the Phantom Riders Motorcycle Club, which was quite successful at the time. Aware that most of the neighboring motorcycle clubs were tired of the Black Diamond Riders' intimidation, Guindon allied himself with their presidents and offered them the idea of forming a super club that would decimate the bullies. Thus, in 1965, with the permission of Notorious, he refounded the Satan's Choice Biker Club in Toronto. It was a solid merger of the Phantom Riders, the Canadian Lancers, the Wild Ones, and the Throttle Twisters. Guindon purposely took up the Satan's Choice name and patch to piss off the ego-inflated Sombrero. Overnight, Guindon had revived a dead club and reinstated it as Canada's largest motorcycle club. With this newfound numerical advantage, Guindon declared game on all Black Diamond Riders. He made it his mission to hunt for and provoke them at any chance. He disrespectfully rode to their clubhouse and taunted them to come out and fight, to which they intelligently refused. Guindon even went the extra mile and ordered Sombrero and his men to stick to their territory and stop raiding other biker clubs. Since Satan's Choice was the largest biker club in the country, they enjoyed the privilege of deciding how small their rivals' territory should be. After enduring enough humiliation, most Black Diamond Riders abandoned ship, and by 1968, what was the largest biker club in Toronto was now an empty shell of itself with only 15 members. Unlike the self-proclaimed supreme commander that ruled with fear, Guindon was seen as a local hero. His fellow bikers loved every single minute with him. One could strongly argue that the rowdy French Canadian was the unlikely savior that Toronto desperately wanted at the time. Sure, the citizens of Toronto were prosperous, hardworking, organized, and conservative citizens. However, many at the time, especially the youth, believed the city was unbelievably boring. As the famous 1965 Satan's Choice documentary portrayed, the people were desperately looking for excitement in their lives. Excitement that Guindon and his band of unruly bikers offered. Not only was Guindon the star of the documentary, but he was also a figure of envy for most young people at the time. They romanticized his biker lifestyle that they associated with freedom, from the boring social norms that were prevalent back then. One woman even confessed that she loved riding with the crew because they weren't phony. As you've probably noticed by now, the outlaw biker culture back then was very different from what it is today. Sure, they had their occasional violent stunts, however, it was only limited to fistfights and brawls. They never used guns and extremely rarely had anybody murdered. They didn't fight over drug territories or anything like that. Most of their squabbles were to show dominance and maintain their public image as the coolest biker club in their respective towns. As charming and well-liked Guindon was, of course, not everybody thought of him as a hero. After all, he was still kind of a criminal who enjoyed some dose of violence. Particularly, the police didn't like his increasing popularity. They even had a patrol cruiser outside his home at all times. On top of that, they interrogated visitors as they left and entered their property. The authorities always felt he was up to something sinister, but couldn't find the evidence to put him behind bars. Through the 1960s, the Toronto police strategically organized several raids against the Satan's Choice Biker Club. The most memorable one was the 1967 St. Catherine Siege. Guindon had organized a huge field day for all bikers and associates in St. Catherine. All was going well, until several police cruisers suddenly pulled up at the premises. Then, like a scene straight out of a movie, around 100 anti-riot officers stepped out of their vehicles in battle formations. They then proceeded to intimidatingly bang their nightsticks against their shields as they advanced towards the bikers. 100 armed officers were enough to scare anybody but Guindon. Courageously, he ordered his people to calm down and let them come. He knew that they had the numerical advantage. On that day, Guindon had approximately 200 people on his side. As the police were just within range, the French-Canadian president ordered his people to charge. Overwhelmed by the sheer number of bold, violent bikers, the police broke formation and quickly retreated to their vehicles. It was an impressive victory for the Satan's Choice Biker Club. The Toronto Police Force attempted several other raids during house parties and established that some members possessed brass knuckles and sawed-off shotguns. However, they just didn't have enough evidence to convict them. This was until Guindon found himself facing serious allegations. It was now in 1967, and the club had grown beyond Guindon's wildest imagination. As the biggest biker crew in Canada, he enjoyed unregulated power, and it wasn't long before he and his bikers were tempted by the profits in organized crime. Soon enough, they started selling the weed they bought for their own consumption. In a few months, they were the leading distributors of illegal drugs in Ontario and Montreal. Nonetheless, it wasn't drugs that got Guindon in trouble. In 1968, the biker faced serious sexual assault charges against a 15-year-old Ottawa girl. According to the girl, she was held in a house for 3 days against her will, where 5 men assaulted her. The police now had the evidence they'd always wanted, and quickly arrested the National Bikers president. During the 1969 trial, Guindon insisted that he was innocent. He claimed he thought the girl was at least 18 years old. He further stated that he never held the girl against her will. On his account, the girl loved hanging around the Ottawa clubhouse, and during his visits, she invited him and his friends to another biker's house for group sex. As if on cue, the wife of the owner's home arrived earlier than anticipated and found out what was going on under her roof. Angered that her husband was cheating on her, she accused the group of rape. The jury listened but didn't find Guindon's defense convincing, and on May 15, 1969, sentenced the Satan's Choice president to 5 years in prison. To date, there are still divided opinions about the trial and subsequent sentence. Some believe the authorities and prosecutors set up Guindon, since over the years they couldn't find enough evidence to lock him up for good. Others believe the president was guilty owing to the misogynistic tendencies sometimes associated with the outlaw biker subculture. Truth be told, the verdict was a big blow for the growing biker club. It also didn't help that Guindon was facing internal issues before his arrest. Because of the huge drug profits, some of his chapter presidents had gotten greedy and were even attacking fellow members in other biker clubs. The president wasn't completely opposed to violence, but he also didn't resort to it unless it was absolutely necessary. He didn't like the idea of excessive force and murder because it would trigger police crackdowns and they were bad for business. It's also the reason he didn't like partnering with American clubs. According to him, they would needlessly destabilize Canada's biker scene. As Guindon served his sentence at Kingston Maximum Security Prison, Garnett took charge as the acting national president. Life in prison is hard for anybody. However, it was particularly harder for Guindon. Other inmates considered him guilty of a skin beef, prison slang for those sentenced for sex crimes against children. Guindon even suffered several assaults and murder attempts. Concerned, the prison authorities insisted that he take refuge in a special protective wing for sexual offenders. Guindon firmly refused, insisting that he was innocent of the charges laid on him. It worked. Slowly through the weeks, he convinced other inmates that he didn't sexually assault the 15-year-old girl. Kingston prison psychologist Paul Henry was greatly impressed by Guindon's character. He was a man's man. There was nothing I didn't like about him. He never needed a psychologist. He was too solid, rock solid. The term chick magnet is an understatement when it comes to Bernie Guindon. He was getting women even in prison. A few months in, he started receiving sexually explicit letters from a female university student who saw Guindon's face in the newspapers and deeply fell in love. One thing led to another, and soon the biker was receiving frequent conjugal visits. She eventually got pregnant with twins, and the two got married at the Kingston Prison Chapel. Later in life, Guindon commented that even he himself didn't fully understand his womanizing charms. He even publicly confessed that it wasn't because of his manhood. He claimed his penis was very small, citing that one woman he got with stated he was hung like a stuffed field mouse. Speaking of manhood, I've got a quick word to share from the people who made this video possible. I'm talking about the amazing men's care service and this video's sponsor, Manscaped. The Performance Package 4.0 is basically the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. It comes with the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, weed whacker, crop preserver, crop reviver, performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag to carry your grooming tools. The Lawnmower 4.0 is my personal favorite. It features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents and ingrown hairs, due to Manscaped's advanced skin-safe technology. It also comes with an LED spotlight to help you get a precise clean and is even waterproof. The other items are the cherry on top. The Weed Whacker, Performance Boxer Briefs, Crop Preserver, and Crop Reviver is a perfect collection of goods to keep any man clean and comfortable. The holiday season is coming up, and Manscaped is the ultimate gift. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code HoodChronicles at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com using code HoodChronicles. Now let's get back into the story. Owing to his good conduct, Guindon was transferred to the minimum security Joyceville institution until his parole in 1970, when he went to Thunder Bay to reunite with his father. The reunion might have sparked a long-forgotten dream, because not long after, Guindon took up boxing. He was so good that he even trained with Canadian heavyweight champion George Chuvalo. Nationally, Guindon won the Ontario Golden Gloves, the Eastern Canadian Golden Gloves, and the Canadian Golden Gloves tournament. Internationally, he won the boxing bronze medal in the 1971 Pan American Games. He was on his way to the 1972 Olympics before his prior rape allegations disqualified him on the grounds of bad character. His bad character was further amplified when he broke parole rules by associating with Satan's Choice members. In 1973, he was again eligible for parole but turned it down. Guindon told the authorities that the so-called criminals were the only friends he had and he was not willing to give them up. Finally, in the summer of 1974, Guindon was released and now free to associate with whomever he wanted. He went back to Thunder Bay and reunited with his fellow Satan's Choice members. As he assumed his throne, Guindon was welcomed to an even larger biker club. With more than 300 members across the country, the Toronto-based Satan's Choice was now the second largest biker club in the world, behind only the Hells Angels. Furthermore, they had progressed into distributing and manufacturing Canadian blue methamphetamine and PCP. Guindon saw the opportunity to expand the business and partnered with the Outlaws Biker Club, which served as their exclusive sellers. The move irritated Garnett, who was accustomed to calling the shots. Not only did he want power back in his hands, but he also favored partnering with American biker clubs. He decided to set Guindon up. In August 1975, Guindon visited a hunting lodge at Oba Lake to meet with the drug dealer Temp Blaine. It was a perfect location for such meetings, since the area was so remote that it was only accessible by plane. Unfortunately for the just-released president, Garnett alerted some undercover cops in the area who raided Temp Blaine and his guest, Guindon. The two were arrested after being found in possession of $6 million worth of PCP tablets and manufacturing equipment. A year later, in May 1976, they were found guilty of conspiracy to manufacture and sell drugs, and were sentenced to 17 years in prison. At the time of the verdict, experts estimated that Guindon's drug network spanned as far as Florida, and he was making at least $60 million a month. From behind his prison bars, Guindon could only hear about how his biker club was slowly falling apart. The Outlaws gang he had partnered with had conspired with Garnett and patched over several Satan's Choice chapters. The once popular president slowly slipped into depression and later confessed that while in prison, he did more drugs than he ever did when he was on the streets. After 8 years in confinement, Guindon was finally released in 1984. He immediately got to work reinforcing what was left of the Satan's Choice Biker Club. Thanks to his undying charisma, he established 4 more chapters and took in 95 new members. He was back in business. Having failed in the PCP and methamphetamine business, he switched over to selling cocaine and opened up a pipeline that supplied the drug from Toronto to Alberta. Back then, cocaine was popular among pipeline workers because it helped them deal with the physically taxing nature of their jobs. With the bad taste of betrayal in his mouth, Guindon wasn't going to hold back this time around. He allied with the Los Bravos and Grim Reapers, and was ready to take on anybody who stood in his way. In 1995, Satan's Choice got into a bloody biker war with the Loners gang. It was so bad that the rival gangs even attacked each other with rocket launchers in broad daylight. The then Toronto Mayor, Barbara Hall, had had enough and almost banned all outlaw bikers from Toronto. In May the following year, the authorities launched Project Dismantle, which took down many of Guindon's allies. In retaliation, Satan's Choice bombed the Sudbury Police Headquarters on December 15, 1996. By the late 1990s, having survived several biker wars, including the Satan's Popeyes clash, Guindon had had enough. Furthermore, he was now suffering the side effects of brain damage, owing to his boxing career. Inevitably, in December 2000, he gave in to Walter Stadnick's persistent request and patched over Satan's Choice to become Hells Angels. Those who know Bernie Guindon know it wasn't an easy choice for him. He was a strong Canadian nationalist who in his young years wouldn't stand to join hands, let alone patch with a foreign biker club. Nonetheless, he did it. Later in 2012, he stated that he had no other alternative. He was trying to keep his guys together. He knew regardless of his decision, the Hells Angels were going to enter Ontario. He patched over to avoid violence. Guindon remained at Hells Angels until April 2006, when he retired from outlaw biking. His decision to quit was escalated by other high-ranking Hells Angels, Steve Galt, who wanted to recruit him for some shady deals. Sensing that the partnership would only end with him in prison, Guindon gave up his Hells Angels jacket that Galt burned in front of him. Nonetheless, he was given a Hells Angels ring to show that he left the club in good standing. A year later, in September 2009, he remarried his longtime lover, Nikki, whom he first married 48 years earlier in 1986. All in all, Bernie Guindon remains pivotal to the Canadian outlaw biker culture. He is an icon to many who had the privilege of experiencing Satan's choice when being a biker wasn't about drugs or crime. Back then, it was a means of self-expression and freedom. As always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Also leave a comment down below letting me know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching and have a good one.